So, first of all, Criminal Justice Giving Project. Holler. Okay, so cool. Yeah, most people here. So those are the people that are part of the Criminal Justice Giving Project, and I'll talk with you all about what that process looks like. Oh my goodness, I grabbed Sarah's questions. I'm so sorry. Can I have? Yes, can you run them over, and now I have to go grab my questions. I apologize.
I'm trying, but all the buttons that seem to say are not.
I'll see it. Thank you.
And I don't want to be any break.
You don't need it. Okay. I wonder what is there a place to put it? I know there's a lot.
Sorry. Okay. So, for folks who are not in the Criminal Justice Giving Project, we have 26 people who have decided to come together, devote several months of their life and a whole lot of hours and a personally meaningful gift to learning about criminal justice organizing through a race and class lens, and to raising money and doing the grant making to actually fund that work. We define criminal justice issues broadly, so not limited to just what you normally think of as the criminal justice system, but really thinking about all the systems that criminalize people's lives based on race, poverty, gender, disability. And here are just 3 examples of organizations that are doing that work. I'm going to go ahead, and have each of you just go ahead and introduce yourselves. If you could please just introduce your organization and briefly describe what you're working on. How briefly?
Like 2 minutes?
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay. So first I just want to say, like, if it looks like I'm scowling at you, it's only actually because, like, occasionally my eyes, like, catch the glare of the, and I'm really not trying to, like, mean mug you or anything like that. My name is David Rogers. I work with the Partnership for Safety and Justice, which is a statewide advocacy organization based in Portland, Oregon. And broadly, we work to try and make Oregon's approach to safety and criminal justice more effective, but also more just. And right now, we're in a pretty intense campaign, and we're trying to do 3 things in the campaign. We're actually trying to pass a package of criminal justice and sentencing reforms, corrections and sentencing reforms that would actually flatline prison growth in Oregon over the next decade, which would actually alleviate the need to build prisons and actually add, it would alleviate the need to add 2,300 beds to our system. It would save about $600 million over the course of the decade in prison expenses. And we're looking to reinvest a portion of that money into the types of things that we know actually are more effective at building safe and healthy communities, things like community-based addiction treatment, mental health services, drug courts. In that, we're also actually looking to, one of the key things we're trying to do is ensure that there's also more money going into life-saving community-based victim programs like domestic violence shelters and sexual assault hotlines. I can talk a little bit more about that later. And then the last part of the campaign is that we're trying to change the ways that Oregon's mandatory minimum laws automatically treat youth as adults in the criminal justice system, which defies all of what we know are the best approaches to youth crime prevention. So that's us.
I'm Rosalinda Guillen, and I'm the Executive Director of Community to Community Development, which is based in Bellingham, Washington. And we're a people of color, farm worker-led organization. We are doing a lot of work in Whatcom County right now on race analysis, on doing racism and oppression. We have a campaign to end racial profiling in Whatcom County, which is moving towards a citywide ordinance in the city of Bellingham and eventually to countywide work. We are developing cooperatives, so we have a series of ongoing trainings for farm workers and immigrants on cooperative development. We develop leadership leadership in the farm worker and immigrant communities, women leadership, and youth leadership. So we currently have a curriculum that we've developed for youth and women on, I guess you could call it building community in Whatcom County in a cross-cultural manner. And we are planning for a National Farm Worker Convocation, which is scheduled for Saturday, May 18th, and that's going to be an analysis and community roundtable discussion on the national domestic fair trade movement and its relation to domestic-based farm workers and immigration reform. And we're also currently in the planning process, well, a little bit beyond the planning process of the first annual Farm Worker March in Whatcom County, which is scheduled for Sunday, May 5th. And you're all invited.
My name is Mary Flowers, and I started volunteering with the Black Prisoners Caucus about 13 years ago through organizing work that I was doing with People's Institute and later an organization that we founded, Village of Hope. So we were actually asked to go to Monroe, to the Black Prisoners Caucus, around some education organizing that we were doing, and one of the volunteers who was already there kept coming to the events and the organizing efforts and saying, you need to take this information, you need to go up there, you need to go up. And it took a year. This person came faithfully to every single thing, and we finally were able to go up. And the men there, I've been to prison a lot of times, and to jail and whatever. I have a lot of relatives there, but to go there and to go inside and see 75 to 100 men looking so strong and so powerful and so determined to change their reality and the reality of the community was probably the most profound and sad thing that I'd seen, because it really underscored what we need to be doing out here to prevent people from having to go to prison, to have that kind of experience of self-help, self-support under the most difficult of circumstances. And we can create that reality out here so that people don't have to go to prison under that crazy environment to try to, it was a collective power is what I felt. You can have collective power no matter where you are. And we just have to figure out how to create more venues for that to happen. So it's been life-changing for me personally. It's been profoundly impacting for our organizing here in Seattle, in Washington State, in the Northwest, and throughout the country, because we're connected through the BPC through a lot of organizing networks out here.
I agree. My name is Rashid Thomas. I'm a member of the Black Prisoners Caucus, and I second everything Mary just said, so we can proceed.
Okay, thank you all. So my first question is actually for all of you. All of your organizations are led by the people most directly impacted by the issues that you're working on. What is challenging about that, and how do you meet those challenges? And what is particularly powerful about that? You know, Mary, you were actually going right there, so maybe that's a good segue for either Rashid or Mary to respond to that.
Read the question one more time, please.
Sure, sure. Being an organization that is led by the people most directly impacted, in your case, Black prisoners, what is challenging about that kind of organizing? How do you meet those challenges? And what's particularly powerful about organizing that way?
Well, again, I'm a member of the Black Prisoners Caucus, so I would say that what's challenging about dealing with people that are most affected, especially on the inside. So it's not like in most organizations that people with grassroots organizations, it's like a lot of stuff is going on in the community. So we're able to contact people, to be able to network with other individuals and other organizations in regards to the best way to go about achieving the objective. But when you're inside, you're limited to what you can accomplish. So, you know, when you have to snail mail an organization in regards to resources or assistance, that's kind of a long process. A lot of people email now, but you're not afforded that in there. So it's very difficult inside. And then once you look at the things that are going on in there, whether it's the education summits or the town hall meeting that happens yearly, or all the other events that happen while we're inside and doing racism training and other different things that happen, it's very difficult to organize that when you not only organizing, but you're dealing with the barriers that are set up by the system. So it's there's a fight that happens, then we might not be able to meet today. And we might have something happen in the next day that's monumental for our group. So that becomes very difficult. And then when you look at the internalized problems with, gang violence inside prisons, cultural difference, racism issues, all these things become barriers. So you have to find a way to weave through all of this just so you can accomplish your goal. But it becomes easier when you have people like Mary on the outside that we can see weekly and that we can contact and say, well, this is what we want to do. Can you help us do that there? So it becomes difficult, but it's possible. So we've been doing it. And in regards to the second part of the question, I would say that it was the collective power portion, right?
Because what's powerful about being an organization that's led, in your case, by Black prisoners?
Yeah.
It's really difficult to hear, so if you have mics, it would be
We
great.
do.
They actually won't work because we turned off.
Because we
the
turned
projector. So I don't know if maybe we want to
Oh.
everybody
So
go
if you all
closer.
could just
I can also
speak
get it
louder.
back on, but then the things have to.
We also have some chairs up in front, so folks that are having trouble hearing, maybe could move up to the front.
And I'll try to use my big boy voice. too.
Yeah, that would be good too. That would be good too. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to blind the panelists with this.
So I would say what's powerful about it is like what Mary said when she spoke about how when she came and she seen 75 to 100 men sitting in a room amongst each other with some of the most intelligent people I've ever encountered in my lifetime, able to sit down and work as a unit and to accomplish things. So, and a lot of times these same individuals that you see in there are people who on the outside were maybe at war from different gang lifestyles. So for all these men to put those differences to the side and to come together as a whole to say that, well, we have to go back and help the community, we have to atone for our miscreant aspects of our lifestyle. For all the negative things we did, I think that that's the most powerful part, for those same group of people who once tried to kill each other on these same streets to come together and to accomplish things.
Thank you.
I would just add to the difficulty with the leadership piece is that you're dealing with inside of a crazy institution, and so the BPC was organized where they had president, they had secretary, they had all of those things, and then at one point the institution said organizations can't have leadership. They have to, so they can't. First of all, they cannot meet at all unless somebody from the outside comes in. So the programs can't even meet. And then they say that we're instructed as volunteers, you're in control of the organization. Well, that's not where we're trying to go. So when we go in, it's all this covert stuff where you got to act like, you're in charge with the administration, which is ridiculous. But they can't meet unless you do that. But the real leadership is the men, and so it's always kind of this undercover. I don't think probably this is not being filmed, but you have to do all that because, and I understand there's probably some reasons or rationale behind that. But it really begins to fly in the face. So if you think about this organization's been going since 1972. I mean, we're celebrating the 35th anniversary of the Social Justice Fund, but this is talking about 43 years of these men doing these under the most difficult of circumstances. That's why the leadership piece becomes very hard. So you almost have this, everybody understands where the leadership is, and it is the men, and there are officers, there really are officers who take leadership, but they could be shipped out at a moment's notice. So they became really clear. You have to have 7 or 8 people deep who can come up and assume that leadership at the drop of a hat. So they're constantly developing the leadership, which I think is a great model. We've learned a lot from that model as well.
Thank you, Mary. I think I'll move it on down this way. So Rosalinda, the question was, what's challenging about being an organization that is led by the folks most impacted, farm workers and families of farm workers? How do you meet those challenges, and what's particularly powerful about that?
I think, working with farm workers that are immigrant families or immigrant workers also is one of the most challenging things is their time availability. Most of them are working 2 and 3 jobs, 7 days a week, and they're exhausted. So we found that that's the hardest part is like when do you get to them, when do you talk with them when you can sit and talk to them, but they're so exhausted and it's difficult to have the kinds of conversations you need to have So that's one of the difficult things, is that the sacrifices that the leaders or anybody that's interested from that community that wants to participate, they have to make. The other part is just the undocumented component of farm workers. Their ability to be able to move freely and participate gets to be difficult. There's a lot of challenges in organizing farm workers in general. It's a very marginalized, I should say, we're a very marginalized, invisible community. A lot of the times our allies in other communities don't even know that there's farm workers in a community. So bringing that presence back takes time, and you can't bring the presence back without them. So it's a slow-moving process in developing the leadership. You know, there's cultural and language barriers that we have to overcome. But I think, you know, moving into the powerful component about that and how we overcome it, we, as an organization, we follow the Cesar Chavez legacy. And so our organizing work really is modeled on the house meeting model. So what we do is we actually do a lot of individual sessions or meetings or whatever you want to call them, dialogues with immigrant families and farm workers. So we have to literally go out to where they are and have conversations with them. Sometimes in the grocery store, sometimes in the laundromat, sometimes in their homes. It depends on the families themselves. Labor camps, wherever they're at, and having the initial conversation, giving them the information of the work that we're doing and our availability for whatever, you know, event we've got going at the time, or just introducing ourselves. So it takes a lot of time. In Whatcom County, there is no community communications, I guess you could say. Like, there's no radio station in Spanish. There's nothing like that. There's one local newspaper that is now 2 years old or 3 years old that's in Spanish. But our communication has to be face-to-face, personal conversations. So that takes a lot of time. And then, of course, some of our community is very highly mobile due to deportations and other issues like that. Last night, we were actually, we're to the point now in organizing the community because we have actually identified some very respected leadership in the Linden area. We're having weekly meetings just to keep people updated on immigration reform. Because they hear what's happening in the news, but they're members of our organization, and so we have to go. So we went through a 17-page summary of the current immigration reform bill, you know, literally page by page, starting at 6 o'clock, and we didn't get out of there until 9:30. But there were 17 people there, and they know each one of those people is going to take that message to additional, you know, word by mouth about what they can believe and what they can't, and where the timeline is with this. So this is immigration reform. We have other issues that we do the same. But even when you were talking about, you know, the issues in the prisons with different groups and all that, one of the things that came up last night, we were discussing, and things come out, you know, I was explaining who I was, and I actually said, because they were talking about people being afraid and all of this kind of issue, and how, you know, I explained that to a certain extent I have a certain amount of privilege because I was born in Texas. I'm a Texan. I'm actually a U.S. citizen, a U.S.-based farm worker. And they all went, "You're a Texan?" We hate Texans. Mexicans from Texas are really bad people. They're the supervisors. There's the people in charge, you know. And then so I'm a Texan. And then I said, well, yeah, I'm a Texan, but my father was from Michoacan. And they went, what? They're just as bad as the Texans. These are all indigenous people from Oaxaca and Guatemala and other places, you know. So it opened up a really good discussion about how we need to come together and not divide ourselves in that way, because they were totally shocked that I'm halfway human and I'm a Texan. And I'm doing all this work, you know. But it was a good lesson. So I think part of organizing with our community is being able to layer dialogue and discussions on important issues and bringing people together in a very informal manner. What's powerful about this and rewarding for me is that because we are a food justice, food sovereignty organization, every meeting that we have and every gathering and every contact with whoever we meet with, we try to have food, and we try to address the issue of food food production, the food system, their role within the food system. And so the women always cook, which is where some of our projects came out of. But it's very powerful and rewarding through food to have people sit down and eat and talk and feel really good about what they're eating and being together. I mean, we always end up with a lot of laughter. They were teasing me really hard about being a Texan and what am I going to do with the others, you know, and things like that. But then I was also teasing them about the Farm Worker March and how they have to march. You know, Texans aren't going to march, but what if I get some Texans? You know, that it was a lot of fun. But it's also good food, and it's really rewarding to be around farm workers and the farm worker culture, which is different. It is different than some of the components of Latino culture. And I think it's powerful when they're the ones leading the conversation, because the leader from Linden is the one that's recruiting, that's pre-educating them to get to the meeting, and then she facilitates the meeting, and then they take turns. And so she's like cloning herself with others, and having them lead that discussion and challenge on some, you know, important issues like those divisions that exist in class and even race within the farm worker community is really good. So I feel like last night we crossed a bridge that needed to be crossed, and they were finally, I don't know if comfortable enough is the word, but the trust had been built enough for them to actually question it, say, you know, why is it this way? So that opened up a conversation to further meetings about who Cesar Chavez is, why he existed, what did he do, and they know about him because we talk about him all the time, but now it's like, okay, tell us exactly how he did what he did and why you're doing this and what can we do. So we're moving into additional empowering education, which for me is really exciting. Yeah, it is.
So I have a few things to say about this question, because it's a really good question. And so I'm going to do two things, which is I'm going to talk really fast, and I'm also actually going to limit, I think, my responses to other questions, so I can say what I need to say on this. So I just want to say, like, first of all, in terms of the response to the question of, you know, what does it mean to organize and be an organization of impacted people, I totally forgot to tell you that, in fact, our membership, who our membership is, we actually have a holistic analysis around change, and we work with everyone most impacted by crime and violence in the criminal justice system. So people convicted of crime, survivors of crime, and the families of both. That's our membership and base, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. But you know, the reason why it's so important for us to organize impacted people, you know, just to step back, you know, in a bigger picture way, is that the systems that are created to make the laws and the policies that fundamentally influence how we live our lives on a daily basis are designed to prevent people who are most impacted from actually engaging in influencing the development of those laws and policies. And it's like, if you go to the state capitol and the legislature, it's like you could not find a more alienating process and place for people who are trying to who are impacted by the laws that are being made there. And you know, our legislative process is really designed fundamentally to elevate the voices of people who are already in positions of power and influence and are moneyed. And so that's something that we have to push back on. And when you look at criminal justice, right, it's like we know that our criminal justice system and our society's approach to building safe communities would look fundamentally different if the people who are actually impacted by the criminal justice system were helping to influence our policies and laws. I mean, like, just to be clear, the people who are most impacted, right, by crime and violence in our society are low-income communities and communities of color. And those are the same communities that are being ravaged by the policies of mass incarceration and our prison buildup. And if you talk to folks in the communities that are most experiencing crime and violence, you know what? What they're going to want in terms of approaches, right, to building safe communities, because we all want to live in safe communities, everyone wants to be safe, would not be, you know, the 24/7 lockdown, would not be a prison system that actually where we're spending more on our prison budget than on higher education in Oregon. people would talk about, well, you know, what really develops safe communities are investments in, you know, making sure everyone who wants access to addiction treatment or mental health treatment would get it. We want to see more robust focus on creating jobs in our community. We want actually schools that educate our young people. That's what folks are going to be focusing on if they're talking about public safety policy, right? But they're shit out of the conversation. And so when we look at actually the folks who are most influencing criminal justice policy in the legislature, you know, honestly, you know, it's when you look outside of the district attorneys and law enforcement, and in some states, the private prison industry, because there's so much money there, although that's not the case in Oregon. You know, you're talking about largely a suburban, white, upper middle class folks that live in safe communities already, but have total misperceptions of crime based on, you know, classism and racism, but also actually based on totally horrible reporting of crime in our 24/7 news cycle. Because if you ask anyone, actually, if they believed you, if we told you that in fact crime rates in Oregon and Washington State were at 40-year lows, no one would believe you, because every single time you turn on the news, it's like, you know, crime, murder, gang, shooting. You know, so it's like we need to push back on the people who are actually influencing lawmakers, and because the folks who are actually influencing lawmakers have essentially adopted the kind of politics of fear, right? Again, based largely on classism and racism. And so they've essentially bought into this notion, this tough on crime notion, that if we lock people up and put them away, that we're going to be safer. And you know, that tough on crime mentality, I mean, like, how about we get tough on poverty? How about we get tough on homelessness? How about we get tough on racism? That's when you know, it's like, that's what we need to be doing if the folks who are most impacted are engaging lawmakers. So anyways, I digress a little bit. So the challenges, right, are that, you know, largely, right, the people in our organization come to us because they've had horrible experiences with the system. Whether they're, you know, they're formerly incarcerated, or they're a family member who someone's in court or someone is on the inside, and the way the process is set up has really been about crushing them. You know, that it's one size fits all mandatory minimums. There's been no real examination of the individual circumstances of their case, or crime victims, crime survivors who weren't necessarily about prosecution. They just wanted support to rebuild their lives. They weren't getting that from the system, because the system's really about prosecution. It's not really about helping survivors rebuild their lives. And so people have been crushed by the system. And so in that respect, you know, people who are most impacted, right, aren't necessarily immediately set up to speak truth to power. I'm just gonna be real, right? It's like we've been beat down by the system, and there's internalized pressure there, and like, you know, and part of it is, one of the challenges is that, because we're not gonna just push our members out, you know, in front, either with the media or lawmakers, and set people up to fail. I mean, that'd be bullshit. And it would just be actually reinforcing the impression that people have already been experiencing within the system. So one of the challenges is actually making sure that people have, you know, we have a robust approach to, you know, to leadership development and training and political education. So when folks are prepared to actually engage lawmakers in the legislative process and the change process, and not disempowered by it, because it's already a fucking disempowering process. Excuse my language, but you know, it's true. I'm a passionate person, and it's true. And so we need to actually make sure that if we're not developing people's leadership, then we're reinforcing the oppression that we're actually fighting against. So that's an important part. And then the other thing, because I totally agree with what's been mentioned, is the one other thing I'd mention is that, which is a challenge, is people are mad. People are mad, and they have every right to be. I mean, our members have been screwed. And the reason that's a challenge, right, is because anger is good, but like not hot anger. You know, it's like hot anger, like, you know, where you just want to go in, you just want to kick the doors down of the Capitol and, like, you know, take some people out. It might feel good, but it's actually going to take a step back. It's not strategic. And, you know, so what we need, right, and that's part of the training, right, is actually we need cold anger. I'm not going to tell people they shouldn't be pissed off, but we need to figure out actually how to make sure that we can individually and collectively channel that in a way that's strategic and productive and actually makes change. You know, we need that kind of like premeditated level anger. In the power, right, the power of organizing and building collective power for impacted people is that, first of all, it's one of the only ways that we can really make lasting change, that we're going to end up getting policies that actually are better reflective. And you were saying this earlier this morning in your intro. It's like, you know, people who are impacted actually have a better understanding of what needs to really get done to address the root causes. And then the last thing I'd say is, in terms of the power of it, is that, you know, internalized oppression and oppression is very real. And we have seen so many of our members, like, not just be part of an amazing social change process, but their lives themselves are transformed because they experience a level of personal transformation in the process of organizing. And so now all of a sudden, people are like finding jobs and going back to school and engaging in healthier relationships because they are stronger and they are becoming leaders, and that is actually then having all these positive outcomes just in their personal lives, let alone our ability to create social change. And so, you know, I just don't see how you could work on social change without organizing the people who are most impacted.
Could I add something to that? Is that the intersection between food justice and criminal justice is this whole detention component of immigration reform. And that the majority of farm workers and immigrant families have gone through this process where they have just been totally dehumanized and are in the process of being forced to lose their dignity. And so that discussion and the ongoing fear in rural communities like in Whatcom County of the presence of an overwhelming presence of Homeland Security agents and local police has just become incredibly stressful and intense in our area. And I think that that's part of the challenges that we have. Is like, how do you organize a completely fearful community to rise out of that in an area where, you know, the local police force is in such cooperation and collaboration with Homeland Security. And I think that the immigration process has been moved into the criminal arena because all of the incarceration is done by the private prison industrial complex. And so almost everybody you meet either has somebody at the prison in Tacoma or has had somebody there. It is just, it's intersecting into almost this private prison industrial complex, and this criminal justice system is intersecting with almost every system in our communities today, everywhere you go.
Rosalinda, that absolutely anticipated my very next question, which is what is a food justice, you know, self-described eco-feminist organization doing working on racial profiling? I think you just laid that out for us really nicely. But can I ask you to just describe a little bit more, because I don't think there was, when you were introducing yourself, I don't think you talked very much about this, about your work on racial profiling and on Border Patrol police collaboration.
Well, we're a farm worker-led organization, and as you all know, if you don't, at least 70 or more % of farm workers in the United States are undocumented. So you have close to probably 2.5 million farm workers across the country, and you know, over 70% of those are undocumented, included in Whatcom County. So when we, as food justice activists, and myself, I was a union organizer and I'm a community organizer now, and I'm working in the farm worker community because I'm a farm worker. And you go and you work to improve the conditions of farm workers in agriculture, and 70% of them are undocumented, and you begin to have those conversations. they are actually the ones that have developed all of the programs at community to community, because it came from them, but all of them have this analysis and this fundamental change that they want to see happen in the community related to how immigrants are treated, which I and a lot of people like myself relate to a lot, because we all have this relationship with our home countries. And even though I was born in Texas and raised in Skagit County, I grew up in Mexico for the first 10 years of my life. So I have this mixture, you know, as a Mexican American. So I think that when you empower people, or when people empower themselves, what we do is provide the space for people to be who they are. And in every community you go, leaders are already there doing their leadership work. Communities are already self-organized to try to survive, to try to take care of themselves, because the existing institutional systems aren't working, right? So when you identify those leaders, or rather when they contact you and let you know who they are, and the community lets you know who they are, our role as an organization is to create the structures around them, exactly what you said, right? To give them that space to take the leadership and to bring their innovations into a community that doesn't even know they're there. So,
can I ask you to describe the campaign, just kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it a little bit, and describe the campaign around racial profiling?
So the campaign against racial profiling came out of that community, that the leadership that said, this is what we need to see change in our community. And through all of the stories and all of the relationships that we built with the immigrant community, the big thing that came loud and clear from the very beginning was that, and we didn't know this, that the dispatch from 3 cities, from Sumas, Linden, and Blaine, the local police dispatch was going through the main communication center of the Border Patrol, which means, and it's huge, it's a room bigger than this. Every single police call, 911 call and police call in these rural cities went through the Border Patrol system. And we did a tour in there. You could literally hear the local police on the speakers. And so every time that there's a call that a community member places, the local police show up, and immediately thereafter, or almost before the local police, the Border Patrol agents show up, and they're interpreting. So that's one of the biggest issues that the immigrant community said, we have to do something about this. And of course, a lot of it was racially motivated. A lot of the stops by local police was racially motivated. And then we started asking more questions about that and found out that the way that they're keeping data and how they're documented these stops and these incidents, the way that they're keeping the race data does not identify Latinos as Latinos. And so we need to change this system. So the campaign to end racial profiling, which actually in Spanish is alto al abuso, you know, that el color de nuestra piel no es un crimen. I mean, we tried to say, okay, we need a campaign name, but no, esto es alto al abuso porque el color de nuestra piel no es un crimen. So the color of our skin is not a crime, stop the abuse. And so the campaign to end racial profiling is, first of all, to develop leadership to push the campaign forward, but then also to pass a local city ordinance, beginning with Bellingham, to change the way they keep data and to, you know, build that community and ensure that the local police forces are not collaborating with federal Homeland Security agents. But the other big thing is we've done with that is we've done a public, what is it, a FOIA?
Freedom of Information.
Yeah, Freedom of Information Act from all of the 3 police forces, the 3 cities, and the Border Patrol on all of the calls for the last 3 years. And now we're going to be filing a complaint against the cities and the Border Patrol because they are impeding justice for immigrants and Latinos, because now everybody's afraid to call 911 because Border Patrol is going to show up. Whether you're undocumented or documented, it's a racial profiling call that you're making. You're basically saying, come and get me. So the campaign is about that. It's about, first of all, building leadership in that community that needs to take lead and use. If we manage to pass an ordinance, they have to be able to use it. They have to be able to complain and to be empowered on that. And it's really an ongoing process that we think is going to take, you know, we don't know how long yet. It depends on the strength of the leadership of the community. But the campaign to end racial profiling is just that. It's the campaign to end the racial profiling. We want to stop it.
Excuse me, thank you. Some of that. Rashid, you had something?
I would like to, just add to that, and what the fellow here says, David.
Yeah.
What David said is that what I find is, I guess ironic, or I guess almost amazing is that how everything correlates, everything goes together. So even though we all have different organizations and different objectives, most of the objectives are still the same, just like the paper says. So when you think about it's a short story, when you think about, like David said, the internalized oppression that we deal with amongst each other and amongst other people, in the systematic racism and the racial profiling. So for example, is that and in the BPC what we do is educate. So I would say that the key thing is to educate people about racial profiling. I would say the second most important thing is to know that just because you don't get racial profile, that other people don't. Some people are like, well, I don't get racial profile, and I go everywhere. And it's like, and that's why it's called racial profiling. But I say that to touch on both topics, and I feel like I should tell the short story because he touched on internalized oppression and she touched on racial profiling. So today, when I was coming, my ride told me, "You're gonna wear that there?" I said, yeah. I said, "What you think I was gonna wear?" She said, "Well, I think you would wear a suit or something. It's a conference, right?" I said, well, one thing I noticed since I've been out, and I got out in November, I did close to 10 years, is that people like me for being who I am. And just because they initially see me and they judge me, that I'm all right with that. Because all I do is start speaking, and then they'll be able to like, all right, okay, we get it now. So when I come through the door, I was here like at 8:30. I came from Tacoma, and we come through the door. I come through the door in the internalized oppression part. Security guards out here, and he was somewhere off doing whatever he was doing. And the lady was behind the counter. I said, well, I'm here for the conference. I'm pretty early. And she said, oh yeah, you're real early. They haven't even came in and set up yet. I was like, well, I'd rather be early than late. And then she was like, well, I think it's all right if I wait here. And she says, yeah, it's all right if you wait there. So I go to have a seat. As I go to have a seat, here comes the security guard. And I have my hood, and my hoodie's back here because it's pretty cold. I got to catch the bus home. So I wore that underneath it, and so I had it on. And then he says, hey, excuse me, sir, what are you doing here? You got class, what are you doing here? So I see where he was heading. This is the internalized oppression in the racial profiling. And then, so I say, and this guy's African American, so I tell him, thank you anyway, but she already handled it. I got an understanding of exactly what I need to do, but I appreciate it though. And so, lady, thank you for giving me the information I need. And I go sit down. I'm going to sit down. But he's like, no, that's not good enough. I asked you, what are you doing here? Why are you in here? Do you have class? What are you here for? So I know I could tell her here for the conference, and the lady knows, and she's sitting there minding her own business. So I said, no, I don't have class. But like I said, I already got to understand what I need to do, so thank you anyway. So I go to sit down, and this guy, he won't let up. He wants to know, what are you doing in this building? So after about the third time, I said, I'm here for the conference. And then he was like, all right. And then I figured he would go, and then the lady left. And then I figured he's a security guard, he got stuff to do. But instead of leaving, he stands around and he has a seat. So I'm sitting out there, so I get up to go walk around. Since you want to follow me, I'll just walk around and let you follow me. So long story short is that this is the type of stuff that we have to deal with. These are the type of situations that we deal with when we talk about internalized oppression. So it feels like he feels like when he sees me come through the door, this guy comes in, he has a hat with letters on it, and he has a hood on. He shouldn't be here. I go to Pierce College full time, so I don't see why I shouldn't be on campus. But that's just a short story. I just wanted to say that because it touches on exactly what everyone on the panel is speaking about, and how serious it is, and how it's a reality every day for certain people. So, and this is something that I deal with often. So I just thought I might say that as insight and I guess empirical knowledge in regards to how people have to deal with this.
Thank you, Rashid. I'm glad that I know that happened. We'll talk about it later. I have a question actually that's for any of you. Black Prisoners Caucus has been around since 1972. You mentioned, Mary, community, what, 10 years?
Oh, that's a long story.
And a partnership safety justice.
14 years.
14 years. So nobody's new to the game. What changes over the last few years, over the time that you all have been involved personally, or over the lifetime of your organizations, what changes have you seen in the criminal justice system, and how have your organizations adapted to deal with that? That's for him.
Well, I was just turned 17 when I was here for 10 years, so I spent most of my young childhood in prison, and I'm now 5 months. So you know, this is all new to me, and when I went there, I wasn't how I am now. I was a lot more wild, and my priorities weren't not lined up accurately. So I did a lot of things that I shouldn't have been doing. I didn't care about a lot of things that I should have cared about. So while I was in there, I was given the time to educate myself, to understand, get a better understanding of life and my role in life and what I have to do as not only African American in America, but as an individual in society and how I can affect change. So as I began to learn and educate myself, it was when I took college classes. So I took political science, for example, and as I took the political science, watching CNN was no longer the same for me. I understood, so I spoke the language. So I was able to actually watch it and really understand what was being said, especially during election season, because there's a lot of political terms that they used during that time. So while I was in there, the things that I encountered growing up in prison was that in dealing with criminal justice was that the best way to affect change is to understand. So while I was in there, I seen a lot of different things happen, and early on I didn't care less. So I was in there, I seen certain things with the way the prison system works on the inside. And then if you go back to different levels of security and different things like that, dealing with that, the way the criminal justice system works on the outside, and how the sentencing ranges are extremely unfair, and how people are dealt with it. So I was declined on. That's why I was charged as an adult when I was underage. So when you just deal with those type of situations and the stuff that you encounter, it becomes sometimes more than you can bear, but I guess you have to live with it. But for example, a few different things that I encountered and I've seen change in the criminal justice system really isn't none. It's really the same as it was, and it continues to be that way. And even when people put forth the effort to make the change, it's still difficult. So it's an ongoing process. So, but there's people working on things like 3-strike laws and how they're unjust, and how they affect a large majority of a minority group in America, and how the drug sentences have been set up to keep people incarcerated for longer periods, and just different things like that. So being in there, and then even like a small thing like when Officer Bendo was murdered, that things like that at Monroe, that's where the Black Prisoners Caucus headquarters are at. When she was murdered, and I'm pretty sure you guys seen it on the news, that type of stuff would have like the system, like the whole jail, like locked down for weeks. And you won't be able to do nothing but just sit in the cell for weeks. So when you're dealing with the people in there, it's kind of like a melting pot of violence and hate and ignorance. But what I have begun to see is that a lot of people on the outside are putting forth the effort to help people on the inside educate themselves. So there's been a lot more educational opportunities, not by DOC, but by people who volunteer their time to come in and teach the prisoners in there. So I have seen a lot more education involved inside in regards to that. And you know, back in '92, I think it was, they took higher education out of the prisons, and I guess it still is. But if you're a volunteer group, you can come in. So like Doris Buffett, she's Warren Buffett's sister, and she's a billionaire, and she's donated a lot of money on the inside to putting education inside prisons in Washington State. So they actually have like campuses there with educators and professors coming in from all across the state to come teach people, so people can get AA degrees and things like that. So I don't want to be long-winded. So I think that that's just some of the examples of some of the changes that I've seen in there, and while I was inside. And just on the outside, when you deal with the criminal justice system, I don't think that nothing's really changed. I think that, like David spoke about legislation, the legislation is being written and it's being adapted to continue to keep the oppressive tactics, to continue to push the agenda. So even when something does change, like today, there could be a Supreme Court law that could come out today, and it could free 50,000 people because they were all arrested for this crime and they all had this flaw in their case. And within the next 3 or 4 months, they're going to make sure they figure out a way to turn that around. So 100,000 more people are going to use that same law to get out. So it's continuously continuously just oppressing people.
Yeah, I would add, I think like maybe there's like about five things that I think that would be really important to note. So when you put it in the terms of like, you know, we've been around for almost 15 years. And I'm gonna reflect a little bit on Oregon and a little bit about the country. So when we were getting started, since we got started, the Oregon's prison population has almost doubled. The prison budget went from about $600 million to $1.4 billion. We're one of 5 states that spends more money on our prison system than on higher education. The same could be said about Washington State and nationally, that like in that span of time, right? Essentially, we have grown the world's largest prison system, and it's pretty unreal. At the end, and it's costing so much that it's also actually taking away money from, you know, schools and life-saving human services, and yet actually that doesn't really seem to matter. It's actually, for the most part, the prison growth is beginning to trail off nationally, but you'd think actually that there'd be a lot more change. I'd also think that, though, on a positive note, public attitudes are changing. You know, for the first time, we're now at a point where nationally people, the overwhelming majority of people feel like the war on drugs is a failed strategy. And that's actually a really great thing. That said, the public at this point is way out in front of lawmakers. And so, you know, reforms to mandatory minimums and the policies of mass incarceration are not happening at a fast rate, even though the public has a much more nuanced, complicated, and accurate understanding of what are the best ways to actually prevent crime. And then the 2 other trends I would note are that the private prison industry, and although this is less the case, I think, in at least Washington and Oregon, outside of immigration, which I'm going to say, the private prison industry has grown dramatically, and many states around the country have developed an unreal level of political power. And the other thing that's changed is the connection between the growth of the private prison industry and the development of anti-immigrant policies. I mean, at this point where we know that like the massive anti-immigrant policies that have moved through Arizona State Legislature have were pretty much entirely written by the private prison industry. And the majority of prison beds now being built by the private prison industry are immigration detention centers, right? Not unlike Tacoma. And so I think that intersection, the growth of the private prison industry and the connection between, you know, anti-immigrant laws that are driving the kind of immigration prisons has been, in the past years, has really been really deeply sobering and tragic.
And I would like to add that I see that it's almost like looking for new markets. The private prison industrial market, industry is looking for new markets. And right now, undocumented immigrants is a money-making venture, right? They are like, their profits have skyrocketed since the United States started focusing on enforcement and deportation. And it's not even about deportation, it's about holding people in costly prisons. So the change that I've seen in that, it's just exactly that this rush to incarcerate undocumented immigrants. But then the other component that we see in our communities is this cultural change in rural communities of local law enforcement and Homeland Security agents. There's a militarization happening in our communities by this huge growth of the number of Homeland Security agents in these small, I mean, like Everson only has 2 people. I think maybe they have 2 full-time and 2 part-time people in their police department. And they're just like this good old boy club with the Homeland Security Border Patrol agents out there. And this is growing all over the country. This relationship is changing, and there is a mentality of being at war all the time in communities that never had that kind of relationship before. So I think that the big change in criminal justice that's happened is this change between what local police forces used to be more like community policing, you know, sheriffs and police officers, because they were part of the community. They were small communities, small cities. Now they think that they're soldiers, and they have this support with cameras and all of this equipment, and that's another big change. The technology that's being used to basically monitor the whereabouts supposedly of immigrants, right? But it's not, it's everybody. And I think you might have seen this in the news in Whatcom County, that the local farmers just got incredibly angry and upset because they are running in the crosshairs of Border Patrol agents chasing undocumented farm workers. And so they're being, so I mean, I think that there's been a huge change in culture in our country today because of the criminal justice system all over the country and the funding of these agencies. We have FBI, CIA, the drug enforcement, you know, we got Coast Guard out there, we got, you know, you name it, there is a contingent of federal agents in our community.
Hey, let me, oh, go ahead, no, please, go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you're saying, because it's so true. And we're seeing, I think with every initiative that you see, if it's a youth initiative, it's a street, it's some sort of street initiative, there's always a police component attached to it. So when we talk about the outreach piece, what used to be just straight up social service outreach programs, which weren't all that effective anyway, but now it's always tied to that criminal justice piece as well. And when you look at the disparity in the funding for those things, you'll have like some pennies thrown out for the social service side and millions over here on the law enforcement side, which they don't talk about. They never talk about that piece. So in all of the initiatives, I think back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s, they had the Weed and Seed initiative, and that was, they used that language with that programming all over the country. And it really, it aided a lot of the gentrification that happened. We've seen that happen all over the country, so that went side by side. And now the language has changed a little bit. They don't say weed and seed, but they have other kinds. Like right here in this area right here, they have a new initiative called Center City Initiative. Sounds great if you listen to it, because it's talking about the safety of everybody. But there's a whole law enforcement piece that's the biggest piece to that. And I think that people are so preoccupied since Homeland Security. People are over preoccupied with their personal safety all of the time, and it's tied to the whole to the Homeland Security piece. But people are talking about being safe all the time. Everybody's just preoccupied with that because we're fed that. David, you mentioned that media feeds us that all the time. And so people are just so, and safety equates with more law enforcement for many people. But they never think about the people then who are most negatively impacted by law enforcement and by criminal justice. What does safety mean for them? So when we think about this neighborhood right here, for those who don't know, this is a Belltown area. And you go further down this whole corridor of 3rd Avenue. So you have new condominium dwellers coming in, paying $1 million to live in a condominium, but you got people who've been on those streets all the time. And it's like some folks are concerned about their safety now, whose safety needs are addressed. So what does it mean that when you have a greater police presence for some folks, that doesn't mean that they feel safer. Other people feel real safe to have a police presence. So those are the things that we see changing. Those are policies that are changing, there are funding decisions that are being made, and there are the kind and gentle, nice people in the Pacific Northwest who are so liberal, but have the preoccupation that they have the right to be safe as well, who are helping to drive that stuff. And it's just a real insidious thing that's happening to us, and we're sleeping while it happens. And we've got people tucked away all across this country. You go to that Tacoma detention, that's a trip when you go there. But we drive past that all the time, and we don't understand. Folks have been in there for years. Can't even recognize. Years, detained, sometimes not even charged,
That's right.
but detained for years, and that's just a silent. They have all across this, and we talk about the proliferation of prisons, it's amazing. There's plantations all over Washington State. Tucked away. When you're on your way to the ocean, you need to think about how many plantations you pass, because I call them plantations, not prisons. And they're tucked away, and you don't see them, and they then become the local economy, economy boosters. So places where the logging industry went bust, now you have prisons and they're employing people. So that whole thing, when you have that and people entrenched in their jobs, that's how they're raising their family, they have no incentive to stop the flow of prisoners coming in. And that's the thing I think that we have to be really clear about who's impacted. Folks need to really go to those plantations and visit. It's a crazy, because I really feel the folks who are underpaid as prison guards, they're really underpaid and overworked, and they're imprisoned 8 to 10 hours a day too. I mean, to me, I don't see any difference. You go out voluntarily going in there for 8 hours a day, and you're underpaid. They take that oppression that they're experiencing out on the people on the prisoners. The same system that we had back in slavery days. It's the same thing that plays out. The security guard that was here today, he's the overseer protecting City University, which is another plantation. So to me, this is a big plantation. We've had the same system all along. And whether we're talking about people who are farm workers, it's the same system. And that's where I think social justice comes in terms of when Rashid talked about the biggest thing that's been done is the education. That's happened in spite of the system. That's happened because people have volunteered their time. There's education going in because people have volunteered, not because DOC is doing it. It just happens maybe Warren Buffett's sister, hopefully, maybe some of the work that we've done have influenced her. But that's still private money. That's not institutional money because they don't value the education piece. We're the taxpayer. The most profound thing I ever heard when I went to the BPC, one of the leaders at the time, he said, we may not vote in Washington State when we're locked up, but we have family members who do. And if we can organize and mobilize the people in our families, first of all, if there's relationships that need to be mended, that needs to happen. But then to have that communication with our family members across race and across class as well, then you could have the most profound voting bloc going in this country if we could think about how we organize around that. And so I would say, because I get frustrated living in Seattle with all the liberalism. You know, we got to get real about that. What does that?
Nice.
Yeah, so nice, and all that other stuff. How do we? When you talk about going to the grocery store to organize people, that's what it means. It means really getting in there and having conversations. That's why today is so profound, because we get to look face to face with people and really talk about what this is. But it can't be just today, because we all in this room have to think about how do we start mobilizing our people. And I mean all of our people to really make the change. Because sometimes stuff sounds good and feels good when we go to a conference or we go to, and I'm not clowning the conference because it's important, but we got to do this tomorrow. So yeah. I would challenge all of you, first of all, I want to thank everybody because the fact that the BPC got funding was profound. But I'm going to also say we spent about five months arguing about the money. I know that's not your question, but I want to keep that real because
that's my next question.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm going to cut you off right
okay,
there.
Good. Okay.
Because I know David had something to add. I have one question about funding, and I want to leave plenty of time, sometime, for your questions.
So it would be irresponsible for me not to do a speed round add-in to the question because actually Rashid and then Mary actually hit on something that it was crazy that I didn't say around the question of trends. What's been changing. Is you know when you talked about actually the disappearance of the education on the inside, it's like and then Mary, you talked about actually that where the trend of actually where the money's going. One of the biggest trends, right, is as we've seen this massive growth of our prison system in around the country and then spending on prison. Is the trend in essentially defunding the things that actually are most effective at actually preventing crime. And by the way, Washington is a research leader in this area. So for those of you who don't know, the Washington State Institute for Public Policy has done like groundbreaking research on doing a cost-benefit analysis of like what actually most cost effectively reduces future crime, right? So they've been able to put numbers to, okay, put someone in prison, we get for every $1, we invest in prisons, we actually get, I think at this point, it's a little less than $1 back in terms of benefits from reducing crime. For every $1 we're putting in community-based addiction treatment, we're getting $7 of benefits back from reduced future crime. So they've done this analysis, right? Including programs like, in-prison education. And so what we've learned from this research that actually states around the country are learning from, that's happened right here in Washington State, is that the very programs that are actually most effective at actually reducing crime and for less money are the very programs that are actually have been divested in and under-resourced over the past 10 to 15 years as our prison budgets have been bulging. And for me, that's one of the most tragic trends, because we know what works. At this point, we know what works, and we're not doing it.
That's a great segue. I have one question that gets to funding that I really wanted to get to, and then I really want to leave time for these folks' questions. So sorry to cut you off, Rashid. But what I wanted to ask, and if you could just keep your responses really brief so we leave time for questions, is I could listen to any one of you all day, seriously. But
you got the wrong panel.
I know. Why is this work so hard to fund? And I'll just say real quick, what we know is that the Foundation Center says that they call it civil rights and social action. We say that's the closest category to approximately what we fund, 1.5% of foundation funding. And less than 7% of overall foundation funding, not in that category, but overall, is targeted to communities of color. So that's a teensy little sliver of a not very huge pot to begin with. Why is that? Why is it so hard to find funding for this work? Anyone?
Well, I think it's structural racism, first of all. Even where I am a woman of color leading a nonprofit organization that internally we don't identify ourselves as that. We are a movement building, system transformational organization. We're a leadership development organization. So when I talk about the primary work that we do is leadership development, I see people's eyes just kind of go somewhere else because they don't know what that is, because they've never seen farm worker leaders or people of color in Whatcom County actually forge as leaders and transform systems. So they don't really think we can do it. Really, I think they don't believe we know what we want, that we don't know how to do it, and that we're just there because, we're there, and Rosalinda talks a lot, and I'm trying to be everywhere I can be and put farm workers on the table. We're not going away. So I think that that's part of it. I think that, when you talk about social justice and civil rights, a lot of the funders really don't think there's a problem. And that if there is a problem, it's being solved by experts, right? We're not the experts. We're the victims that are trying to, I really think they look at us as individuals, not collectively as an organization or as a group. So I'm just being brutally honest, right? And also organizations, I think, that speak truth to power are not generally liked in a liberal community. I mean, really, we're not, because we are negative. Oh, here they come again. No matter how good we do, they're going to come up and tell us what we did wrong or what we're doing wrong. I mean, seriously, you can feel it. It's like, okay, here they come. And we work within the food system, right? And so that, right now, there's a lot of good feelings in Washington State about our food system and about things that they want to do right and all that. Well, where are the farm workers? Where's the discussion around labor and food system workers and wages, right? So I think that that's part of why we can't get funded, because we're an irritant. So
I see nodding heads to that. Other thoughts?
I would just quickly say, first of all, for a lot of organizations, it's shoestring. It's hard to write a grant, because you got to find somebody who has the time to do that and the expertise to be able to do it, write it in the way that it needs. This was such an easy process because people did not have to lie. The men basically wrote what they were doing. It was a simple process, it was straightforward, and they could say exactly what it was that they were doing. They didn't have to rethink or think about all that other stuff. When they had the site visit, they kept it real. This is what we are, this is what we do. usually 9 times out of 10, most of what's funded, first of all, they don't want to fund for your liberation. That's not what they're trying to. They're trying to fund to fix broken people. So that if you're not about fixing broken people, then you're not. You make yourself look that way, or and rearrange what you're doing. But there's very few folks that are foundations that are really out there to fund the kind of work that is really truly liberating.
David, any last thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm building on that last point. I mean, I think that like there's very little philanthropic money out there for social change advocacy and organizing, let alone criminal justice. I mean, first of all, criminal justice is like the scary issue. It's the issue that like, you know, it's not like we're, you know, working with like, you know, little school children, you know, that like people can feel, it's like so beautiful and nice and it just puts a smile on my face. But that, by the way, I mean, I'm joking, but it's very real, right? And dynamic. I mean, it's one of the reasons why actually so much philanthropic money goes to like the arts. I fucking love art. You know what I'm saying? I like, and I think it has I think it can have a social change impact. But you know, we need more money for social change, and I think that part of it is the problem is that a lot of people who are giving money, you know, want kind of this simple, immediate sense of satisfaction, and so even the socially conscious ones, right, are then funding social service because it's like easy to quantify. It's like, oh yeah, I helped feed 10,000 people. Well, that's great, actually, you know, because I don't want anyone going hungry. But when you're talking about social, but that's not social change, right? It's like it's not changing the root causes of why there are hungry people. And so, if we're talking about changing the root causes, it's complicated and it's slow, and it's difficult to measure, right? So it's like because changing the policies that have been hammering people down for years and years and years. I mean, we talked about how hard it is, right, to move people in the legislature, in terms of power dynamics. So that stuff doesn't change overnight, and so you know. Like, you can't just support any one of the organizations that are represented up here and think that, like, you know, bam, you know, your, like, grant, like, for a year is going to somehow, like, fundamentally change the social issues that you're interested in. It ain't gonna happen. This is long-term work. And a lot of funders don't want to be in it for the long haul, and they actually don't have the understanding and expertise to be able to think about how you measure social change beyond. So they're focused on the, okay, well, you know, we housed X number of people, we fed X number of people because it's simple and it's immediate. And you know what? I want to make sure that, like, you know, homeless shelters and domestic violence shelters and food pantries have the resources that they need. I don't want to compete with that, but it's about generating more resources, not just this kind of like there's a limited pie of resources. It's generating more and devoting more towards the stuff that's actually going to change things.
Great, thank you. Okay, your questions, please. Oh. Hi.
First, thank you. It's humbling to see that you guys are actually doing groundbreaking work, because I call myself a community builder, but I'm not compared to you guys at all. So first of all, thank you. Secondly, how do you initially get people together? Like, are people of color, communities that are low income, that I come from, are we undermined of how smart we are? Because when I look at my community, I think that they don't know what's going on. I don't think they know the system is messed up, and that, yeah, they're not getting the resources they need, but are they really knowing what's going on in the inside? How do you first educate, or do you just assume that they know and you just start, you know, you rally and you get together, but how does that start? Like, how do you initially get people together and moving? Like, it seems scary, it seems hard, it seems impossible for me.
I would say you start with education. So I think that, like Mary told me earlier, that people should have to go inside just to finally figure it out. But that's often what happens. You like when you're out and you're doing the things that you do, you don't know how it affects you. You don't understand how the enormity of it, how it affects you, or how you can go about fixing it. So you just say, this is how it is. So a story I like to tell is when I was younger and I used to be in the streets selling drugs and all that type of stuff, people used to always tell me, older friends of mine used to always tell me, hey man, what are you doing out here? It's 3 o'clock in the morning, it's election season, go in the house, you're tripping. And I used to be like 13 and 12, like, what the hell does election got to do with selling drugs? What are you talking about? What does election got to do with selling drugs? So, and then when I went to prison, I took the political science course, and I realized that when election season comes, people was trying to make quotas. They're going to send out more officers to arrest more people. And I was like, man, that's what election season, man, that's why I should have been now. So, but it took me all these years to figure out how it affects me. So once you figure out the correlation between how it affects me, then I think that when you go around trying to get the people to come together, I think that you just start with like a nucleus of people who have I don't want to say clout, but I guess I will say clout. I would say respect. They have enough respect that they can go to somebody and say, this is what we're doing, and you should be a part of this to help us move forward with that. And also, I think that whenever you're doing social change work and you need the community to organize, if you want to help people in the streets, you always have to have someone that's truly of it. You can't go out there and not have nobody that's truly of it. I can't say, well, I want to help people who are getting out of prison, get out and go to school and do this and do that, and I've never been to prison. I don't know nobody in prison, but this is what I want to do, and I need to go out and do it, because I'm never going to actually understand the prisoner. I'm not going to understand why he went to prison or how we go about it. So that's, yeah, I'll end it there. I think that the key point is that getting someone who's really of it, no matter what it is, and you can't say, well, I want to teach people how to play basketball and then go get somebody that swims. That might not work out. It's not going to work. So the key thing is that having somebody that's really of it, and also secondly, or firstly, I would say having somebody that's respected enough to be able to be a leader and to be able to get people to follow the movement.
Rosalinda or David, do you have an add?
I think in low-income communities, integrity is huge. I think that as a community organizer, you have got to model integrity in everything that you do, word, deed, set the example, and be in the community. And you have to understand the community. The other part that, at least in the work that we do, is communicating with communities in their culturally appropriate manner, because if you were to walk into a C2C meeting, you didn't think it was a meeting, you know. I mean, whatever meeting, it's like a party or an event or a meal, but there's some very serious organizing going on. And in another case, you know, a conversation in a grocery store or in a laundromat is a meeting, but it's a very personal discussion that moves towards collective thinking. So we actually don't do the education first on political or history. We build a relationship on trust and integrity first. And then we begin to have the conversations. We don't ever start the education until the person asks for it, until they ask the question. Why is it this way? Can you tell me? Because at that point, the integrity and the trust has been built, and you can dig deep into what the fundamental causes of that person's internal oppression is. I am a farm worker who had to understand my internal oppression, and that was a very painful process. To really learn exactly how deliberately screwed I was. You know, when you learn this was done to me and my father and his grandfather on purpose. There is a plan for this. And my brothers and sisters and my aunts and uncles, we have all been deliberately put down this direction. It was very painful to me to learn that. And so I'm very thoughtful about, with farm workers and immigrants, about the process of how you begin that discussion about internal oppression, because it has to be done in a way that is respectful and dignified. And most importantly, you have to have the space and the ability to provide the support for the development of a solution. If you don't have the capacity or the ability to be able to walk with that person as they are undoing that oppression, coming up with solutions and be able to support that and walk with equity with them in that solution finding, then keep your mouth shut and stay out of the way. Don't go in that community. Seriously. That is not real organizing.
I mean, I'll say that there's no one model, right?
Yeah.
That like there are a lot of different approaches, and they can be equally effective. And it's all about context. Because I gotta say, like, there's some things that Rosalinda just described that I think are fundamentally different than what PSJ does. And I appreciate the question because you know, we actually really experiment with a lot of different strategies because I feel like we're always trying to learn. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do is hit the sweet spot between actually having people deeply engaged in our work, but we also have to hit scale. I mean, we're trying like the stuff that we're trying to do is really actually very big and intimidating, and I'm actually not sure we're really going to be able to accomplish all of what it is we want to do. And so we're constantly trying to figure out how is it that we actually get enough numbers that we have a real sense of power, like that the power brokers feel like we have a sense of power. And so for that, actually, we're constantly figuring out how to actually increase our numbers. And that's challenging, right? So we do a lot of back to basics stuff, like door knock, we phone bank, we like do what Social Justice Fund did, which is like drag one of your friends to a meeting. You know, and we do actually do a lot of public presentations at churches and in other spaces where because we feel like if we can provide a compelling presentation of like the stuff that we're trying to deal with, you know, everyone there might not have asked for it, but like if we can really like lay stuff out, people are moved, and that's how it is we actually gain new members. So I think that there are, you know, a lot of different approaches, but I think our thing is that we're regularly trying to bring new people in, and sometimes we're good at that, and sometimes our strategies just aren't getting it done. Honestly.
I think that is true for everyone and everything. Thank you, yeah.
Thank you for coming today. I'm really appreciative of being in the room today. Thank you. My question, I'd like to frame it in a story. I have a dear friend of mine whose husband is serving a life sentence. She has 6 wonderful children, and the other day we were meeting. She's also a partner of mine, business partner. Her son is 13 years old, and there was a brief moment in his life where he had really wanted to be an attorney for one reason or another. He's a family of color. Anyhow, his mother had wanted to introduce him to a judge who was very open to mentor him and, you know, help him along that path towards achieving his dream. You know, when the time came for him to meet the judge, he flat out refused. And it was mentioned earlier in David's answer, that there's a lot of anger and a lot of distrust. I mean, to him, the whole system is responsible for taking his father away for the rest of his life. So as my question then in that context is, as people who are working in this seemingly endless quagmire of oppression, what is it that keeps that hope alive? Like, what is it that drives you, that motivates you, even after going through 14 years of seeing very little change in the system? What is it that keeps you motivated and inspired?
Great question, and I'm going to ask you to keep your answers.
I'll keep it short. I would say that the will to succeed is what keeps me inspired, and also I was inside. My mother was murdered, so for me to be able to make her legacy greater than what it was when she was deceased, I think that's why I continue to strive. In regards to the young man, I think that when you live in the midst of all the turmoil and chaos and you see it, it becomes, you're the bad guy. So even if the judge isn't necessarily bad, I just know that my experience with you is bad. So since my experience with you is bad, then you're bad. So it's like Eckhart Tolle talks about the pain body in A New Earth. He talks about how no matter what happens, if I have a bad experience with this person, when I go into the next experience with the next person, I'm gonna go back to, I remember when this happened last time. So it might not be that this person is out to get me this time, but I still remember the pain from the last person. So, you know, that's probably what he's dealing with. Even when I was younger, when I was growing up, I never wanted to be a police. Like, oh, I want to be a police officer when I grow up. Like, be the police? I never want to be the police. I'd rather be the guy on the corner than be the police. But so I think that it's just like being able to express to him that everybody isn't bad, but it's also knowing that there's this guy. He said, I'm going to be real brief, so I'm about to come to a close. There's this guy, and he said that you don't tell a 5-year-old that gardener snakes are all right to play with, but don't play with the cobra, because he's 5. He can't differentiate. So you just tell him, don't play with any snakes whatsoever, and then once he becomes old enough to tell the difference, then he'll be able to know what snakes to play with. So in his mind, the judge is the snake. And I think as he grows, he'll be able to realize that, all right, he might be the snake still, but he's not deadly, so I can play with him.
Okay. What gives you hope and keeps you going, David?
Sometimes it's hard to know. I mean, it's like community organizing and social justice work for me. It's like a momentum that gets built that you just, there's changes that need to be made. It's like once you realize the reality of all of these oppressive systems, you can't help but see it almost all the time. You can't get away from it. But what keeps me going, I think, is when a farm worker facilitates a meeting and negotiates their own liberation. Angelica going to meet with the Skagit Valley Community Food Co-op and negotiating free donations for her healthy kitchens. She never would have thought about doing that 4 years ago. She just set it all up, planned it, called them, went in, she got it. And she comes back and she's just like, it's all set, I did it, and blah, blah, blah. It's just, she's so happy. That sense of fulfillment from farm workers when they're in charge of their own destiny, it's amazing. It's like, okay, let's go to the next one, and she's already targeting somebody else to take with her next time to observe her. That keeps me going. That's what keeps me going. The people.
I mean, there are a lot of things I think that I regularly acknowledge that I have a tremendous level of privilege, actually, and I'm first of all living in the free world, and I kind of feel like part of it is that I feel like I owe it to work for people who to improve the lives of people who are worse off. I think to a large degree we make sure that we celebrate the small victories, and I think that's pretty important. And the other thing is that although you mentioned, I think referencing something that I said that like not as much has changed as perhaps should have, and I think that that's true. We also have to remind ourselves that, frankly, if we all are not doing the work that we're doing, all the forces that are in place that are keeping the status quo of like oppression and injustice in place, that's like it's a force, right? Although it's status quo, it's a force. And if we're not actually organizing things, now we might not be accomplishing as much as we'd want, as fast as we'd want, but if we weren't doing what we're all doing, damn, things would be a hell of a lot more worse than they are. And so, I mean, part of it is just we need to remind ourselves of that to get through the bad days and to keep on keeping on.
And I just want to touch on a theme that I've heard from all of you this morning that came up over and over, this idea, this theme of internalized oppression, and the flip side of that, this theme of healing and personal transformation, which I just think is so powerful. There's a lot of organizing out there that is dysfunctional, that replicates oppressive systems, and that people come out of it feeling less powerful or burnt out than they were before. So when we see organizing where people are coming out personally transformed and actually healing some of the trauma that has happened to them. I think operating on both the individual level and the systemic level is just absolutely so precious and so inspiring. And I want to thank all of you for doing that work. I do have to close out. I know there are more questions. I wish we had more time. Invite all of you to chat with these folks over lunch and hopefully at Zeke's Pizza afterwards. For the next session, which is going to start at 12:30, if you'd like to hear more about this Justice Reinvestment campaign and this strategy of state budget reform that PSJ is working on, that panel is going to be right here in this room, along with 2 other really interesting organizations. And Rosalinda is going to be talking about organizing in rural communities and the particular challenges and strengths of that type of work. And that is going to be, is that across the hall, really? Rural? I think so. Pretty sure. Okay. Yes.
Victoria Room.
Yes, that is right there across the hall. And food is right here. So please grab a sandwich, get to know each other, get to know these guys, and thank you all so much for